So, if you are brand new today, we have a few first-time visitors, out-of-town visitors. If you're brand new, we are in the midst of a Ten Commandments sermon series. If you've been here every week for a while, then this is no surprise to you that we're in Exodus chapter 20. Your Bible by this point maybe just falls open to Exodus chapter 20. As we go through the commandments and try to dig a little bit deeper, if a quick read of the Ten Commandments can just sort of look like, okay, there's 10 commandments. These are the things you do and these are the things you don't do. And it's very simple and that's it. But I pray that what you're getting out of this is more of the why. What is God trying to say? What is God trying to communicate? There is more to this than just a list of do's and don'ts. And so as we work through this, I'm trying real hard to bring us to a point of, yes, understanding what they say, do and don't do, and what that means in today's application, but to really get at the heart of the commandments. And so for those that haven't been here, by the way, if you have missed other ones and you want to watch them, we're all caught up on our YouTube channel. So you can go to Facebook and you can put in Good News Seventh-day Baptist and you'll find them there, and there's a link to the YouTube channel. Or you could just go right to YouTube and type in Good News Seventh-day Baptist, find our channel, and they're all listed there. But I say that so that you can go get caught up if you want to, or if you miss something, or if you want to share it with a friend, or you want to listen again and get something, or if you just want help sleeping, pick the really long ones, and I will not be offended if you fall asleep to it. To summarize kind of where we've been so far, and to see today's in its context, we're going to read the whole thing, verses 1 through 13, so that we're hearing everything leading up to it, and then we're going to talk through this a little bit. Exodus 20, starting at verse 1. And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow that down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son nor your daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. This one gets, well, there's a few here. The next few are really, really short and sweet. You shall not murder. So just bringing us up to that stopping point in context so far, and getting at not just speaking about the list of do's and don'ts, but the heart of this so far. God is communicating to us. There's revelation in the Ten Commandments. It's not just the list of do's and don'ts. There's revelation about himself. God is communicating who he is, that he's in a category of his own, that he's in a league of his own, that everybody else who wants to say that there are other gods, somebody is over everything and started everything, and that's him. There is no one else like him. He's in a category of his own. He is the one and only true God. He reveals how he is to be worshipped, that he cannot be reduced down into idols, that he can't be manipulated, he can't be turned into a charm or a coin or a bead or anything else that somebody can manipulate or make God do anything. Don't try that like people have done with their other idols. That God is bigger than that, and he's going to stay outside of that. The third commandment is about his name. To have respect and reverence. His name shouldn't be tossed around lightly. He tells us who he is, and if his name is brought into a situation, that should be done with reverence and respect and taken very seriously. And the Sabbath is this command where he says, now listen, every week I need for you to have an opportunity where you stop and pause, take a break, and remember that it's God who does the work. It's God who finishes. It's God who completes things. It's God who takes care of everything. And you just need to get yourself reminded and reoriented to God being God. Rely on him. Trust him. Get things centered back on him. And then we moved after that commandment to where we start talking about from the upward look to the outward look. And he says, honor your parents. But honor your parents isn't just, here's how I want this to go. I want people to respect their parents. What is he saying about himself in this? What is he saying about what needs to happen? God wants to make sure that the understanding that he's giving of who he is gets passed down through the generations. Society needs people to honor the generation before them to allow this to be passed down through the generations. And generations, every generation needs to listen to the people before them and respect them and hear them and pay attention. For the survival, everything from, as we talked about, agricultural processes and learning things from the wiser generations before to the spiritual things. This is how a group is going to survive. So God reveals this. And then today we get to this thing where he says, you shall not murder. Now, that at first, wait a minute, that seems a little like he just pulled something from way out here. It seems like it comes out of left field a little bit to me. But if we kept reading, he goes into a few things. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony. We're going to get to each one of these. But basically God's saying, and these are the other things that need to happen in order for a society to stay running smoothly. And these are my godly values, the way I want people to live, and the way that it works. If you do this, it works. If you don't do this, it falls apart. And he just gives them some basic sort of things. And the first one is, you shall not commit murder. And I think also God is saying, do you know what I said about me? That I am to be revered and respected. God is to be revered and respected. Do you know what I said about, my name is to be taken seriously, and then the generations are to be taken seriously? When I hear, you shall not commit murder, what I'm also hearing God say is, and guess what? The people that I made are important. Life is sacred. Life has value. He's not just saying, don't do this thing. What is he saying? It wouldn't matter if you murdered if people were not important to God. If every life, if every soul didn't have significant value to God, this commandment wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be relevant. So God is saying, as much as you respect me, I also need you to respect others. As much as you value me, I also need you to value others. Don't hate. Don't hate. There's a sanctity of life, a sacredness of life that comes into the conversation here. Every life that God has created should be taken seriously, not lightly. And this is also essential for society. Now, to start the conversation about, okay, so he says don't murder, but what does don't murder really mean? And I've hinted at this last week that we were going to get into this conversation because anybody who reads in just a few chapters, a few books into the Bible is going to say, wait a minute, there's killing that happens that God seems to be okay with. And then killing that God doesn't seem to be. Right away, if you're just a person coming to the Bible, coming to God and reading, right away, there's something, I need to sort this out. And it's worth having the conversation because there are contrasting stories. So let's look at two, both Old Testament, really close to each other, two contrasting Old Testament stories. For me, these are the two easiest and best because we all know the stories. First, we've got Cain and Abel. And second, we've got David and Goliath. Makes sense, right? I'm not going to go back and read the whole text. Cain and Abel you'll find in Genesis 4. And it's really the first 12 verses that I would have us focus on. If I was going to read it, I would, but I'm being short and brief with these sermons. So the text is there, Genesis 4, 1 through 12. And then the David and Goliath story in 1 Samuel 17. Okay? So we're going to look at both of those. Cain and Abel's story basically goes like this, right? Cain is the older brother, Abel's the younger brother. And Cain is given the charge to grow crops, and Abel is given the charge to raise livestock, animals. And both of them are supposed to come, and God gives them, we don't get all the details, God obviously gives them some parameters for bringing a first fruits or a tithe or an offering, and they both have their harvest, and they both bring something, but Cain does not bring the satisfactory offering that God asked for. He withholds something. Again, we don't have all the details. But it doesn't bring the offering that's satisfactory to God. Abel does bring the offering that's satisfactory to God. And God looks at Cain and is disappointed with him, looks at Abel and praises him and says, well done, great job. Cain is mad, he's frustrated, he's bitter, he's jealous, he's envious. Whatever reasons he has, they go out, he says, let's go out in the field, brother, and have a conversation. And Cain ends Abel. He kills him. He takes his life. Out of bitterness, out of jealousy, Abel did nothing wrong, did what he was supposed to do, was innocent, if we could use that word. I'm not saying Abel was without sin, that he was some sort of, no. But in this particular incident, it was not something that Abel did wrong. But Cain was overcome with his jealousy and his bitterness, and he ends it. And what God says is, there is judgment on Cain. There is harsh, lifelong judgment on Cain for committing this sin, this unjustified, violent act. And in the end, what did he do? He took the life of someone. And it's wrong, clearly. Now, fast forward to David and Goliath's story. We're in 1 Samuel, and we're not that much later. We're still in the Old Testament. We're still where, rules haven't changed, game hasn't changed. It's still, by the way, I don't think it ever does. But if someone says, well, there's Old Testament, New Testament. Okay, let's stick to really close together in the Old Testament. David and Goliath's story, and most of you know that story. But Goliath is fighting for the Philistines. Again, it's 1 Samuel 17. The Philistines are an enemy of Israel, and the Philistines come and are positioning themselves to attack Israel. And war is about to break out, and the battle lines are drawn, and they go to fight. And because the Philistines have this ace in the hole, this trick in their back pocket, a giant Goliath, they decide to fight gladiator style. And that was a real thing. And so the armies line up, but they basically send their strongest guy out and then say, you send your strongest guy out and let them fight, and whoever loses, that army has to retreat. And it was sort of a gentleman's agreement. This is what we're going to do, because they thought they had the biggest, best guy. So they send Goliath down, and Goliath is taunting, and he's taunting Israel and mocking God, and no one will fight him. David's small, ruddy guy who had killed a lot of animals with a slingshot, and he says, I'll go fight him, because David couldn't stand to listen to the taunting and the mocking. And David said, it doesn't matter who goes down there. The Lord is with us, because God's not going to allow this. And so David went with confidence, saying, God's with me, puts a stone in the sling. You know the whole story. And he slings the stone, and he finds the only spot that Goliath has a vulnerability, and it's right where his eyes are. And he puts a stone right in there. And Goliath drops and is dead. And to seal the deal, David goes and takes Goliath's own sword and makes sure that the job is done. And I said I try to be age appropriate with kids and that sort of thing, but picture a watermelon rolling off the picnic table. David finishes the job with Goliath definitively. We're having a picnic after. I was trying to go picnicking. But what happens at the end of both of these stories? A man takes another man's life. But in one of them, there's immediate, this was sin, this was wrong, and you know it was, and there's judgment. And in another one, you've done the right thing. God was with you. God honored this, and you are a hero and a man after God's own heart. The same action took place. Can you appreciate that? Can you understand that? Are you with me? The same action took place. But in one case, it's sinful, and in the other case, it's rewarded and heroic. So, the same action and different judgment means there has to be more to this. There has to be a way to make sense of this. There has to be some sort of godly ethic that we need to understand to make sense of this. There has to be more to this commandment. So we start looking at things like the situation, the circumstances, the motivation. Was this just or unjust? And ultimately, I'm proposing to you today, and the best language that I have for it is that there is a difference between killing and murder. They are different words, and they're a different thing. And there are times where killing happens and God says that was right. Where murder happens, God says that is wrong. And so now we get into starting to think about, well, how do we always know? And what does that mean? And so what else do we get from the Bible? And or what does it look like practically today? And I try to give illustrations like from today. I live in the suburbs. We have a bunch of neighbors around us. And let's say that there is a neighbor who just really bothers me. A neighbor that I find really annoying. And he makes a lot of noise outside, or his kids ring the doorbell at bad times, or annoying. He has a dog that barks a lot. Or maybe he's got a really cool big truck and a big boat, and he always flaunts it and says, "Don't you wish you had stuff like I do?" And I begin to get jealous and envious of this neighbor. And everything just works out great for him. And I just begin to burn with envy, jealousy, bitterness, anger. So I decide to make that neighbor go away. And do a little David and Goliath and take that neighbor's life. What would you call that? Murder or killing? That's murder. And there's no circumstance under which that's justifiable. Or where I could be right before God. God's going to look at that and say, "Dave, what is wrong with you? That's sinful. You will receive punishment and judgment for this." But if I hear a noise in my house at 2 a.m. and I'm awakened and the dog barks, and I go and I find that same neighbor attacking my family or my children, and I grab my home defense device and I put an end to that neighbor in that moment, is that murder or is that killing? We aren't as willing to say it. I've killed someone. The end result is the same. The same action happened, murder or killing, but it was the same outcome, that someone else, a neighbor's life was ended with my hands. For me, in my understanding of the distinction between these two, I have absolutely no right to murder my neighbor because I don't like him, or I'm bitter or jealous or angry at him. But of course, I think the only honorable thing to do in my home or for my family would be to protect my children and my family. And by the way, I would. And I practice it, and I'm prepared to. I think that's what a good father should do. That doesn't mean that it's easy. That doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean that you feel good about it. But I don't think it's wrong. In fact, I think it's just. I think in that case it would be considered even heroic. I know to someone who was a potential victim, it would be considered heroic. We begin to get into a discussion about honor and shame, about just and unjust. And I had a really great professor in seminary. He was a Chinese theologian, and he was kind of a guru in ethics. He was working on a book. Unfortunately, he passed away. He was an unbelievable preacher. He would preach with passion and fire that I've never seen before in my life from anyone, which is not typical of all Chinese theologians. But this guy would jump and bounce and sweat and yell and preach, and I mean, you were moved every time this guy spoke. It's just the love of Jesus poured out of his heart. He literally preached a sermon one day and just preached his heart out and walked off the platform and fell down and went to be with Jesus. And I don't think he would have wanted it any other way. Amazing man. But he taught me this principle of honor and shame ethics. And I think he was writing a book on it that I don't think he finished, and I need to look that up. The same activity and the same outcome can be completely different in terms of rightness or justice based on honor, shame, ethics. Meaning, was the thing that you were doing the honorable thing to do, or was it a shameful thing to do? For me to kill my neighbor out of anger, jealousy, bitterness, frustration, it's shameful. For me to take my neighbor's life in defense of innocent people is honorable. Do you see the difference? Honor and shame. And it's not a selfish motivation. It's a protective motivation. So some people, when I start this conversation with them, they say, no, you're going down a slippery slope of situational ethics, where the ends justify the means. You could justify almost anything. And I say, no, that's not true. Because when you put honor and shame to it, and you are a follower of God, and you start to say, what would God say is honorable? Or what would God say is shameful? It actually starts to make things much clearer. It actually starts to make things much more black and white. And we're going to get back to this in a couple weeks when we get to some other commandments, particularly stealing and false testimony. We're going to get back to honor and shame ethics. That's why I'm spending a few minutes on it today, because it's not just relevant for this commandment, but it's what helps us see the difference between killing and murder. What David did, why was what David did glorified? Because it was honorable. He stood up for God and for God's people, and he defended God's people, and he defended a country, and he defended God's honor and God's name, and God was with him. But Cain and Abel, what Cain did was just shameful. God said, you didn't have any right to, there was nothing honorable in it. So it becomes easier to see. And there are so many great examples throughout Scripture. And I also hinted to you last week that we would get into just war theory. So some great thinkers, some great theologians since Bible times have worked on this, have tried to figure this out, have tried to sort this out. And one of them was Augustine. And Augustine lived, it was 360 something to 420 something maybe, his life. But so you've got to go around 400 AD. Somewhere in that time is when Augustine was doing his thinking and his writing on this. And the Catholics call him St. Augustine, and they like to claim him, but Protestants also like to claim him as kind of an early reformer for Protestantism, and the Greek church likes to kind of claim him. Everybody likes to claim Augustine. He's kind of popular with everybody. But he did a lot of good thinking on this, and he wrote a lot of good things. And Augustine developed what's called the just war theory. And really, since 400, so for 1,600 years, this has been kind of the standard moral basis for when is it right or wrong to go to war. For a nation to go to war with another nation, to step into battle. When is it honorable or not honorable? When is it honorable or shameful? When is it just or unjust? When is it right or wrong? And there are 4 criteria in the just war theory. And the 4 criteria are this: competent authority. So his first question was, is there a competent authority making decisions? His second question or criteria was, is there a probability of success? It's a good question. His third criteria was, is this our last resort? And then his fourth criteria was, is the cause just? So if we just really quickly walk through this, I don't want to get bogged down into the weeds. I'm not going to go through American wars. I'm not going to get into controversial. This stuff is not easy when you have to start sorting through this in terms of world wars and things like that. But competent authority, is there a person at the helm making a decision who God put there and who seems to respect God and do moral things and make good choices and decisions? Is there a competent authority steering the ship? That's question number one. And then, is there a probability of success? Even if it checks all the other boxes and it seems like the right thing to do, there's no way we can win this war. It's not going to change what's actually happening in the situation. It's just going to create mass casualties. And it's not winnable. Therefore, maybe it's not worth the bloodshed. Does that make sense? If I can't actually change the outcome or the direction, it's not worth losing lives. And is it the last resort? Have I exhausted other possibilities? In this moment, is there any other way to avoid this, to fix this problem, or any other solutions? And is the cause just? Is it just because I want to gain more land? Is it just because I want to gain more territory? Is it just because I want more power or control? Or is it a selfless or noble or good thing? Are we concerned about innocent people being victimized or being run over by a regime or a dictator, whatever? And so it's interesting when you apply these to war, but what's really interesting is when you go through these criteria and think about them in our personal lives. You can actually apply these to some of our more personal situations. And these same things have kind of been used to create all of the legislation and the laws that we have to determine differences between intentional murder or accidental or negligent death or manslaughter. All these criteria that we have in our laws sort of use these same things. In other words, what was the intent and the motivation and the situation? And so for all of our history, for all of human history, we have been trying to figure out and trying to have ways to make sure that we know the difference between killing and murder, between what is just and what is unjust. And it's important. It's important that we know the difference, because we can't just say killing of any kind is always bad, because that's clearly not what God says. And we can't just say killing of any kind is always fine, because clearly that's not what this commandment says. So even in our own situations, when I spoke to you about a neighbor and about defending my home or defending my family, or going to war for my country if I felt it was a just war, when we speak about those decisions, you can apply these same things and say, is there a godly or competent authority making decisions? Is there a probability of success? Like, can I fix the situation? By the way, home defense laws, if that criminal comes into your house and is committing a crime in your home, most states have, self-defense laws where you have the right to defend your home and property. But if you chase that neighbor or that criminal down out of your home and down the street and get in your car and chase them blocks away and then take your revenge, that's no longer allowed or legal, nor is it really justified, because you're not doing anything then to protect someone or stop a situation. At that time, it's a revenge situation. So you see how that fits into Augustine's theory that there's not probability of success that you're going to change a situation by doing this. Now it's just vengeance. And at that point, it's not your last resort either, and probably not just cause. So listen, I wanted to get into that just enough so that you knew that we should be thinking about the difference. First of all, we're not supposed to commit murder. That's the commandment. There are times when God sanctions or seems to approve of killing. So there's a difference between murder and killing. And then 3, we need to know what those differences are and have understanding of that and know what we're doing and not doing and why. I just wanted to point out, in case any of you were ready to call quits on me or give up on me because I said I would defend my family, Exodus 22 verse 2, where the commandments are kind of drawn out some, and the law is drawn out some. There's a section on protection of property. It's interesting. You can read the Bible, and it really does read like legislation sometimes. And there's protection of property. 22 verse 2, if a thief is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, he is guilty of bloodshed. Isn't that interesting? So be careful about when and how that happens. Now, day or night may not make as much of a difference in every situation in our time. But I want you to understand that everyone, since this commandment, has been trying to work out how do we make sure that we stay on the right side of this. And it's not easy. They're not always easy questions. That's why we have courts and judges and these kinds of things. Let me get back to the heart of this. Back to where we started with what's at the heart of the commandment. People are sacred. Every life is special to God and important to God. Every life is valuable. The death of any human is not to be taken lightly. God's not to be taken lightly. God's name's not to be taken lightly. We're supposed to be reminded of him every week. We're supposed to respect and not take lightly our parents. Every life, or the loss of any life, is not to be taken lightly. I think we're reminded in this commandment that God despises sin, especially if it's the sin that causes the loss of a valuable life. God doesn't like sin. Jump with me to Matthew 5, if you have your Bible handy. It's worth going there just for a minute. I know you already know the passage. Matthew 5. Because another great question is, did Jesus speak to this? He did. Matthew 5, in his Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, just a couple verses, 21 and 22. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, he's referring to the commandments, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. I think that what Jesus is saying there is don't hate people. He was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And what did he say? Love God and love other people. And he's elaborating on this commandment about murder, and he says, don't hate people. Raka, by the way, is just a term of contempt, like, I hate you. And saying, you fool, is just saying like the person is just worthless. It's just contempt. Don't hold people in contempt. Don't hate people. Don't let your heart get to that spot. Jesus says that's where the problem is. That's where the problem starts. So Jesus doesn't even get into the whole, well, which is killing, which is murder, and all that has to be picked out and deciphered. But Jesus says, how about this? Because Jesus always was asked a question this big and gave an answer this big. He took it to the next level, always. He says, don't hate people. Don't hate people. Love people. Understand that people have value. It's sin in the heart first, and if you've got this sin in your heart and this hatred for people, it's gonna start to come naturally to you to sin against them or to do sinful things to them. And I think even if I was going to go a little bit stronger, what Jesus is saying is you can't love God and hate people. It's just, God made people. He loves people, even the worst of them. Jesus is saying, you can't love me, you can't love God, and hate people. Don't let your heart go there. Love people, value life, give life, don't take life. You shall not commit murder is about loving people and valuing people. Life is sacred. Life is special. Amen? Amen.